Welcome to another Pint with Seaniebee. Very interesting one for you this time around. I have a man who is an artist who lives in London. I'm in his studio in Bermondsey. His oil paintings have been exhibited in exhibitions in London, Beijing, and many other places. He is self-taught. He was an architect, and he is currently working on a series of paintings of the Mao ethnic minority in Guizhou province in China. He's also just released his first graphic novel, which I'm holding in my hand, which is called Frankenstein's Dog. There will be a link to where you can purchase that on the blurb of the podcast, and I would urge you all to go and do it because it's kind of scary and weird and very interestingly done. So I'm welcoming to the podcast Jon Wealleans.
Hello, Sean.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Tell me about your Frankenstein's Dog and where...
Well, I was on a very long flight to India, and I had it in the back of my head that he should have made a dog first as a pilot scheme, as they did in the space race with Yuri Gagarin. They put a dog up.
Laika.
And Laika, well done. And I've always been obsessed with horror films. So when I was on this flight, I just suddenly drew up a storyboard. I had 8 hours, and the option was to look at a screen on the seat in front of me or do something. And on the flight back was another 8 hours, so I tuned it up. And then it's been going on for 2 years because I'm a painter, and it keeps getting put on the back burner.
Is it when you're like not sure what to do, you'll do another frame?
I do another page,
right.
Yeah. It takes about 3 or 4 days to do a page.
I know.
Never do a graphic novel. It's a long, thankless job,
Well, I mean, Dolly the Sheep is a good example of our first essays into cloning.
Yes, absolutely. And also the Frankenstein is a very interesting metaphor. I mean, even now, when you get genetically engineered crops, and the tabloids call it Frankenstein food,
yeah.
He's entered in. He's a good metaphor for uncontrolled science,
Mob rule,
violent, ugly mob, the abandoned child.
Yeah,
I mean, Frankenstein never taught the monster anything. In the book, he falls out with Frankenstein, the monster does, because Frankenstein refuses to build him a female, being worried that they would breed a race of monsters. But if he built a dog, he could build a bitch, and all hell could break loose. Yeah. And that's what I was thinking.
Is your Frankenstein's dog nasty or
no? He's not. He's relatively.
Is he a calming influence?
He's a calming influence, and he bonds with the monster, who's obviously been incredibly unsuccessful at bonding with people. But, and that again, an outcome. It was like something you were saying earlier. Hitler's dog. There was a dog that loved Hitler. So this it's a similar.
Norm Macdonald. I'll put a link to his new show on Netflix. It's titled Hitler's Dog. The point being that there has to be a dog that every time Hitler walked into a room just went, Hitler, you're home.
Hitler, and wagged its tail. I'm pleased to see you.
Exactly.
Maybe nobody else.
Boring. I like you, but where's Hitler?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
You love horror.
I loved old horror films. When I read the Frankenstein, the Mary Shelley book, I was only about 13. Yeah. But it bore no resemblance to the Hollywood version of Boris Karloff. They built such a complex set for that they used it again several times for The Bride of Frankenstein, which by James Whale again, which is even better. And I think they did The Son of Frankenstein.
And Young Frankenstein.
But then later, Hammer picked it up and they did The Curse of Frankenstein and also. So I was obsessed with those films.
So do you like all horror movies?
I pretty much do, actually.
Like modern ones, like Saw and all those ones?
Pretty much.
Right.
I'm a bit of a sucker.
I can't watch them. I get scared.
Well, my wife can't. She won't go. No.
I mean, when Scream came out, which is meant to be a comedy.
Yes.
Or ironic.
Yeah, ironic.
I was still scared of Scream.
Yeah.
Tell me about what your background. Where do you hail from?
I was born in Yorkshire, actually, but I came to school in the south. I originally studied architecture, and then I went to the Royal College of Art in London.
What was it like growing up in Yorkshire?
Well, I left when I was 9, so I've not
many memories.
Not really, no.
Where did you move
it's
to?
Grim up north to Bournemouth. So Bournemouth's the nearest thing I have to a hometown.
So they got the accent out of you.
They got the accent. Yes, they did. They definitely did. I had been in a Jesuit boarding school, so when I went to Bournemouth Art School to study, it was like I died and gone to heaven.
Freedom.
There were girls, there was nice, liberal people you could talk to who took you seriously.
Yeah. You wouldn't recommend boarding school?
I wouldn't recommend boarding school to
everyone who
anybody.
I've had on the podcast has been to boarding school says, especially not Jesuit.
Especially not, no, yeah.
Yeah, we've had, of course, our problems with them in Ireland. And
oh, God, you have, and you've had the Christian Brothers and all of them.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily, I managed to avoid, although I was sent to an Opus Dei school.
Really? God, they're fairly hardcore, aren't they?
As well. Yes, exactly. And then you studied architecture. My sister is an architect. George, hello if you're listening. Yeah. Tell me what pushed you into architecture. Why did you pick?
Well, I always really wanted to be a painter, but I had to appease my father to get some money for a grant. He thought at least architecture was a profession. But as a student later at the Royal College of Art, because I could draw, I made quite a lot of money drawing visual perspectives for architects, because architects usually can't draw. So, I mean, I would get 75 quid or 100 quid for a perspective of a building, which was a princely sum in 1967, you know.
Yeah. Were you drawing a lot when you were a kid?
All the time. I drew comics. When I got to the end of, say, the Eagle comic, which I loved, I would do the further adventures of Dan Dare.
Really?
You know?
Dan Dare.
I could still knock you up a pretty good knight in armour.
Really?
Or I was also good at World War II aeroplanes.
Did you get into Hotspur and Tiger?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, my father was a big fan. In fact, my father, I just mentioned before we pressed play, was a ventriloquist. There was the wooden sheriff of something Creek that was in Wizard,
yes,
and that was what set him off.
That's
because it was a sheriff who was very small, and he couldn't command authority.
Yeah.
So he built a big wooden dummy, and he sat on the dummy's knee and made it look like the dummy was making him talk, and then he was able to kind of. And this caught my father's imagination. My father started becoming a ventriloquist and built his own dummies and everything.
Oh, fabulous.
It's amazing the little triggers that...
Little. I'd give anything to say my father was a ventriloquist, but he was actually an officer in the army.
Was he?
Very different. But it reminds me, there was a wonderful sketch of Vivian Stanshall, early days Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, where he's a ventriloquist and he has a dummy, but it's a real guy sitting on his knee, dressed as a dummy. And Vivian Stanshall does all the stuff, and then he drinks a glass of water and gargles. And the guy sitting on his knee spits it out. You realise he's had it in his mouth all the time for about 10 minutes. Brilliant. I love it.
So what other memories do you have, like, of growing up? What was England like at that time?
Well, England was very dull until I think England was the 50s until about 1964. So I'm very much a child of the 60s. You know? And then in the end of the 60s, I won a scholarship from the Royal College. So I went to America and I made straight to what I thought was the epicenter of hippiedom, San Francisco. I went there just at the end of the hippie dream when Manson had just been arrested. He only died.
Doing the interview on the week that Manson died.
Exactly. I remember Berkeley campus, people walking around saying Charlie is God, you know, and kill the pigs. It hadn't fully sunk in. What he'd actually done. And there was a point in San Francisco where every psycho in America went with flowers in their hair, you know. I remember talking to my then wife. We're literally sitting on the dock of the bay, and she said, if we stay here much longer, we're going to end up like these guys, you know. Right. So we came back to London.
Did you feel really out of place there?
We were celebrities because we were English.
Right.
I'm sure that's not true now. They thought we knew the Beatles. You know.
And were you big into music as well?
Massively.
What
Into
sort of
music.
bands do you remember being?
Just the Stones, Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
And all of the West Coast people. You know, I love the Doors. I don't listen to much music from this century, to be quite honest.
We're saying that now. Yeah.
It is. I know. I often use songs like I do Bob Dylan a lot. I was always massive on Bob Dylan as trigger points for a painting. It might not bear any resemblance to the song, but that's my trigger point.
We'll come back to your timeline again, just maybe talk about your painting. And we're looking at a really beautiful piece that you're working on right here in your studio, which is a carousel where it looks like the horses have escaped.
It's called Out of Control,
right.
Which again is a Rolling Stones song. Yeah,
it's really beautiful. So how would you describe? I mean, I would describe your art as bright, colourful, primary.
It's verging on pop. It has a narrative. I like a story. You know, that one there is a Bob Dylan song, Highway 61, which is again a very interesting song, and you could do 10 different paintings to it. It's just a trigger point.
You were doing architecture on the scholarship, and then did you come back and architect?
I did architect right through the 70s and the 80s.
Right.
And I had a design group which grew to about 70 people, you know, but in the end, I was just running around getting work, paying other people's mortgages. Architecture is 10% creative, 90% hustling, writing letters, sitting through incredibly boring meetings and dealing with people that you wouldn't otherwise have through your front door. I remember people used to come to our studio from the day one. They would commission us to design a building. From day one, they had no intention of paying us.
My sister said the same. When the collapse happened in Ireland,
well, it was a big collapse.
Architects got hit very hard,
yeah,
including her company, which folded.
Yes.
The other thing about architecture around the 60s and 70s, especially in Ireland, but I can see it here, is just it just didn't age well, particularly social housing and stuff.
Social housing was dreadful. Well, in the 70s and 80s, which lingered on until the 90s, everybody was crazy about postmodernism, which now looks very, very silly in Toy Town.
Yeah.
But people like Michael Graves were big heroes,
Yeah. Ireland as well, and Britain, there's just this fixation with back gardens and front gardens and taking up a lot of land with, and we have a huge homeless problem in Ireland now.
Absolutely.
10,000 people close to are homeless. And, we just have sprawling, featureless, soulless estates with crime and drugs. And we did build high, but we built high badly. Lifts out of order.
It's difficult to build high good. I mean, I quite like tall buildings that have a bottom, a middle and a top.
What do you mean by that?
They have a base.
Right.
Something, an event, as opposed to a plan form that's just extruded up into a higher column for as many stories as the planners will allow them.
Yeah.
That's all over London,
Did you get disillusioned with the business?
I did, I think. I just wasn't having a good time anymore.
Yeah, I was the same with advertising. I mean, it's not dissimilar when you have what's supposed to be a creative business.
Yes.
That just gets tamped down by the people paying the bills to mediocrity.
In architecture, there are an army of trained bores who are out to stop you doing anything good, and then the accountants come in and they will gradually whittle everything away till you end up with bland. That's the good thing about painting. In architecture, there's always somebody to blame. You can blame the client, you can blame your colleagues, you can blame the planners, you can blame the environmental health, you can blame the site, you can blame the budget, you can blame the timescale. In painting, there's absolutely nobody. You start off with a blank canvas. If you finish it on the 5th of July and take it to the gallery, that's the best you can do. At that point, you might do a better painting tomorrow, but you can't blame anybody. It's nobody's fault if it's a shitty painting.
Yeah. You said you had a wife in
Yes, I got married in America, and then I came to an English woman, and I came back and immediately fell on my feet. I did a shop and a restaurant called Mr. Freedom, which made me famous for 15 minutes and made quite a lot of money. So I was kind of a pop designer, but that wore a bit thin. And
so Frank Lloyd Wright would have been popping up again from his sabbatical in the desert around this time, wouldn't he?
Yes.
With his Falling Water.
Yes, Falling Water. I love the story of Frank Lloyd Wright, such an egotist, such a womanizer. At one court case for adultery, one of his many, the judge said to him, "What's your occupation?" And he said, "Actually, I'm the greatest architect in America." The judge said, "Well, that's a little egocentric." And he said, "Look, I'm under oath. I have to tell the truth."
Brilliant.
That sort of sums him up.
But he had a tragic life. He came home one day and his family had been burned to death in a fire by his help, I think.
Yes.
There was a great story on a documentary of his about Falling Water, where because people like Johnson and those were training under him.
Yes,
he was basically gone to seed. He was teaching.
Yeah.
And a friend of his that I bought this place, and he sent all his acolytes out to record every tree and rock and And the guy said to him, "Will you design something?" He said, "Yeah." And he stuck a tab up on his pinboard saying, "Hallelujah, a client." He hadn't had a client in years, and I think he was about 65.
Yeah.
Apparently Johnson tells a story that he just sat on it for weeks and weeks and did nothing, and they got all the surveying done, and they were kind of going, come on.
Yeah.
And then it was a 4-hour drive from the airport for his friend, and his friend rang him one morning and said, "Have you got the thing ready?" He goes, "I have."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I'll see you in 4 hours." And he just sat down and he just went side elevation, top elevation.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
He just let the idea of letting something stew. Do you follow that with your paintings and your art?
Yes, I do. Whenever I photograph a painting and say I put it online or take it to a gallery or put it even on Instagram, I always regret it because I immediately think I could have made that better. It's a meditative process. So I fiddle with paintings long after I'm supposed to be finished.
Well,
you're finished when they're getting worse.
Munch was famous for this as well. I was in Oslo.
Yes.
He used to just have like hundreds,
on the go.
maybe thousands on the go.
Yeah, I completely understand.
He was never happy with them.
I completely understand.
I find the same with my writing. One of the things I've had to learn moving from advertising to writing is when is it finished? And somebody will read it who maybe you value their opinion, and then they go, I didn't like that bit. And because I'm from advertising, clients tend to go, we're constantly seeking approval.
Yes.
And I suppose from architecture, you were constantly, nothing was green lit until it got approval. Right?
Exactly.
But now, to your point earlier, you're the person who has to
well,
approve
exactly.
your own work.
And I think it's finished when everything you're doing is starting to make it worse.
Yeah,
it's like
good
writing.
point.
Once you start rewriting, there comes a point where you lose all freshness and all spontaneity, and you forgot where you were coming from, really.
But with painting, it's hard to go back.
It's
right?
hard to... Well, I do a lot of work in China, and for for expediency, I do watercolours because it's easy to get them out on pieces of paper. But watercolour, you can't make a mistake. It's very unforgiving.
Yeah.
Whereas oil paint, you can just splash
over
a bit of white on and do it again.
So you're saying you came back with your wife, you hit the big time, you hit the jackpot with this...
Mr. Freedom.
Mr. Freedom.
Yeah. Then I formed a design group, and then I gradually became disillusioned, and then I just decided...
So it was your own company?
Yes, it was called Crichton. I was a coder. I was an art coder. So then I did really about 15 years ago, what I've really always wanted to do, and I just, knowing nothing about the art scene. That's both a good thing and a bad thing, to be an innocent sometimes. And so I just started doing paintings, and I nagged a good figurative art dealer in London called Francis Kyle Gallery, and I wore them out until eventually they decided to represent me, and that's when I started seriously painting for a living.
So talk me through your disillusionment and how long it took you to leap over the wall, if you want to use it.
To leap over one boundary was free.
Expression.
Yeah. March into the sunlit uplands. We were giving some... It was just that I realised I wasn't designing anything anymore.
Yeah.
What I was doing was pretty formulaic rubbish and derivative. Right now, if I went back to architecture, I just wouldn't know where to begin. I don't know what you would do. When I was a kid, when I was a student, the people that taught architecture were in two camps. There were hardcore modernists who thought Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe that was it, basically.
Yeah.
There was a couple of loonies who liked people like Charles Rennie Mackintosh. Then there was another camp who were in the sort of Frank Lloyd Wright group.
Yeah, Geary and people like
Geary,
that.
yeah. And that was it. And then postmodernism came along, and there were no rules anymore. But there were rules then. Modernists, rightly or wrongly, had a code. They had a sort of set of rules. I know a lot of brutalist buildings have been knocked down, but some of them were quite good. They just required proper maintenance, But they had at least a set of rules. When there were no rules, and now there are, I don't know where you would begin. There's postmodernism, there's crash geometry, blancmange type stuff, there's spiky stuff.
But Ian Pei's one in the Louvre, I think, is really interesting.
Ian Pei is very interesting.
That.
Yes, I love that building.
It's so brave.
It is brave, and that's a. But he is fundamentally a modernist.
Yeah,
I would say.
And I think London are doing it now a little bit. I'm not sure whether. What do you think of the shards and gherkins and all the stuff that's popping up all over London the last 10 years?
I like the shard. I don't like what it stands for.
What
I'm not sure about. It stands for ridiculous capitalism. Actually.
Yeah, towering over the Tower of London.
And the gherkin. If you wanted to do an office building, well, a circular floor plan is not the best thing to do because your desks are square. So it's first of all a loopy idea, to do a circular floor plate. But
well, the Guggenheim is a good example.
The Guggenheim is a perfect example of how not to do an art gallery.
That's where art and
architecture
where it all
started.
Collided.
That's where it all started. How not to do an art gallery.
But I've been through the Guggenheim, and
me too.
You don't, because when it first came out, the artists were pissed off because everything's at a slight angle. But you don't really notice it.
No, you don't.
To be honest, it's such a sloping. And if there's anything about Lloyd Wright, he was definitely form over function, because half his buildings were just leaking.
Pure form using function, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's another way. Without a set of rules, you'll get architects who are really basically sculptors. They've got an idea. I mean, the late Zaha Hadid, bless her, had the same approach whether she was designing a hospital or a dentist's surgery or a private house. You got a Zaha Hadid. It's a sculptural form. It bore no relation to requirements. Come up with a piece of sculpture, then make it work.
Yeah.
And make it fit the brief, which is the antithesis of modernism.
Opera House, Sydney, thoughts?
Well, that's one of the first ones. It's
Hudson.
essentially a sculptural icon, isn't it?
Yeah. Pulled out of the bin, though.
Pulled out of the bin, yeah.
By the
riddled with trouble,
Yeah.
massively expensive.
Only just finished the inside.
Just finished, yes.
Again, it looked great from the outside, but not so great for a music venue. Yeah.
Well, that was the problem with Zaha Hadid and her ilk. Nobody could cost their buildings. They could never get a competitive quote.
Yeah.
In
So
the end,
original.
Yeah, it was all computer designed, and nobody wanted to build it. So in the end, whoever did, the Olympic swimming pool is a good example. Only one guy contractor agreed to do it, and he was virtually given an open check. So it went from 200 million to 600 million, and then they cut lots of it out, and it still kept going up. And that's the problem with that kind of sculptural stuff.
You, as an architect, when you were younger, did you always dream to do a world famous appreciated?
No, definitely not. That's another reason I like much smaller scale things. I liked housing. My heroes were all the people in the Vienna Secession and Charles René Mackintosh, who I thought was the best all-round designer ever, because he could do buildings, he could do chairs, lamps, fabrics, wallpaper, anything.
I mean, I was trying to get to the point where you going to yourself, I don't like getting up to go to work in the morning, I'm not happy. Was that where you got
Pretty
to?
much, yes. It's black depression, actually.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, in the end, I was just doing the sketch design for buildings and other people were making them work. Yeah. So to this day, I can drive around, say, Wimbledon, and I see a block of flats and I think, oh, that looks vaguely familiar. Actually, I designed that, It got that bad. Ridiculous.
Can you remember what your first day was like when you said, I am no longer an architect, I am now a painter?
The trouble with painting, this is the recurring problem I still have, is once you crack the technical bit, once you know how to mix colours, get colour right, once you know about perspective, skiography, which is plotting shadows, once you know about composition, once you can say, I saw a teacup like this and just draw it and it's a perfect ellipse and it looks like the teacup, then you've got all the technical stuff out of the way. What do you actually paint, that isn't derivative and that hasn't been... And at first I thought, I loved Old Masters, so I will Dutch still lifes, for example. I will subvert that tradition, but I will do it in a pop way. That's my starting point. And then all of my heroes were people like illustrators, actually, like Maxfield Parrish in America. I thought were the best painters. And I thought Peter Blake was a very good painter.
What did you feel about people like Warhol and I suppose Banksy and people like that who are very pop?
I don't think history will be very kind to Andy Warhol. When he was alive, he wouldn't sign his prints. His manager signed them, the factory manager. But then that guy left, and another manager came.
Signature
so
change.
His signature's as not as valuable as the first manager, because when the first manager signed the prints, Andy was in the building. Okay. Connoisseurs of the half-assed will be able to detect a second manager's signature, Andy Warhol, from a first manager's.
Amazing. And we're also recording this podcast when somebody has just spent $450 million on a potential.
Well, there's the joke about that is it shouldn't have been in an Old Masters sale, because the Leonardo you're talking about, because so much of the painting is new. It should be in modern painting.
Salvatore Mundi, I think it's called.
Yeah, the Christ. It's interesting, 400 million. As I remember from my Catholic education, ironically, Christ was a little bit distasteful about people with massive amount of money. But it's a poor Leonardo painting, and at that time, it's known that he had loads of assistants, and it's been overpainted, varnished, repaired. I mean, it's the ultimate trophy, isn't it?
Someone said it's no Mona Lisa.
Well, the Mona Lisa, that's also an interesting story, because he painted that of that size on
It's tiny
on a piece of wood, and he wrapped it in a blanket and took it around with him all his life on the back of a horse, because it was his calling card. He would just turn up in some city and say, "This is what I can do. Give me a job."
Would people have known back then that was, oh, that's really good?
I suppose so. That technique he had, I think, I can never say the word, it's sfumato.
Yeah.
That smoky smile.
And also the perspective going
the
back.
perspective
back.
behind, yeah. I think that was a first, you know. I think people would have known that he was a maestro. But he also had a tendency to use very experimental materials and pigments as well.
Yes.
Half his stuff's falling to bits.
Walnut wood and all that kind of
Well,
stuff.
and The Last Supper is just, it's a wreck. It's not...
Well, so where does Banksy fit in, or modern street art? Does that
Banksy,
annoy
I think,
you as an architect?
It doesn't annoy me. No, I kind of fond of Banksy. I like the idea at the beginning where he went to galleries and put his own paintings up to shine. That's just brilliant.
Yeah, I know.
90% of art is crap. That's not unrealistic. It's not surprising. 90% of literature isn't worth reading.
True.
Most films aren't worth seeing.
Yeah.
I don't know how many plays I've walked out of at half time. It's a theatre. There is a lot of rubbish.
Yeah.
And this is
90% of ads are crap.
90% of ads.
Crap,
and also the world uses up images at an enormous rate. If you take ads, for example, you can make an ad, and it's shown in the cinema for Volkswagen or something, and everybody laughs, and the next time you see it, you're bored stiff. In actual fact, the minute it's made, in 20 seconds it's in Tokyo and everybody's got tired of it. And the world uses up images.
And somebody's doing a pastiche of it. And something.
Yes, it's at the most alarming rate. So you have to kind of keep feeding images into the system. Really, and they just get chewed up, and spit out.
What year was it when you stopped being an architect and started?
It would be in the 90s.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And when did you meet Natalie?
I met Natalie in the late 70s.
The late 70s, because John's wife Natalie, who has been a former guest on the podcast, Natalie Gibson. If you want to scroll back and listen to her, she is a very central character in Central St. Martin's. She's in charge of textiles. And I'm actually in the same house. And Natalie has a very eclectic. As I said to her, she's very easy to buy for Christmas.
Yes, she is and she isn't. Yeah. But Natalie has. I should mention that because she has been a massive influence on me. Because Natalie has.
How did you guys meet?
It's a complex story. But Natalie actually taught my first wife.
Okay.
It's very incestuous.
Were they friends?
They were. Yes. Oh. Yes. It's all very incestuous. Oh. And,
am I getting a scoop here?
No. But she has a terrific sense of colour, which I find very liberating, which I didn't know about, and
Natalie has a home. I think she's lived here since 1961.
That's right. Yeah.
And it is full of
stuff.
Colourful trinkets. It's like Aladdin's cave. And it's interesting when I first interviewed because she has little robots and little horses and rabbits and cats and plants and flowers, and this was an influence on your art.
Yes, well, the little robots are me. The cats are entirely Natalie, but the robots, that was another thing when I was thinking, what do you paint? How do you subvert the Dutch still life tradition? And I thought, well, little toys, unimportant things. I mean, I've always been metal robots. I've always been more interested in I don't know, low culture as opposed to high culture.
Yeah. There's a dresser in the kitchen downstairs, which is chock-a-block with stuff that I guess has been randomly put there over the years.
Yes.
And John did a painting of the dresser, which
took
very
months. And that was the only time all of the objects were ever cleaned properly. Because I kept finding teacups that had a handle missing, so I glue it on for the paintings.
Yeah.
The painting is it at its most pristine and intact.
Yeah. So what's interesting I want to talk about was your coming together, where you have a person like Natalie who's very bohemian and very, I'm trying to get the right word, but she likes scatter and colour, and you were very kind of.
I used to live in a white flat with a white floor and a white cat and white furniture. I really did. Right. It was in lots of magazines, and in the end, I was hardly living there because I was living here. It was a set.
Yeah.
And modernism is.
Was that a facade?
It was a facade. I now realise. At the time, I thought it was great, but
So when you found Natalie, when you came together, was there a kind of a change in your life that was like
massively, although we do have quite a lot in common. I don't think Natalie has boundaries in terms of stuff that she really thinks is absolutely awful. You know. I'm more severe. My taste is more back into the Vienna Secession and all that stuff. You know.
Right.
But Natalie is a Victoriana, really.
Yes.
And 50s, and you know.
Explain to me, because I don't really know about the Vienna Secession. You've mentioned it twice.
Well, the turn of the century in Vienna, a group of artists and architects who peeled away from the mainstream. Egon Schiele was the key drawer. Otto Wagner was the main architect. They even built their own building in Vienna, which was called the Golden Cabbage by Joseph Maria Olbrich. And they turned away from the public taste, and Klimt was the main artist.
Okay.
Yeah. But their motto was, I'm paraphrasing it, an art for its time. Don't keep copying historical styles, as the emperor was doing in the Ringstrasse. You know, let's do a new thing, and that's why they were called the Secession, because they broke away. To an enormous influence. Still, one of my favourite painters is probably Klimt, and the best life drawer of a female human form ever is Egon Schiele. Just that wonderful nervous line that nobody before or since has got right. You know.
How hard do you think it is to? I mean, given the human, because art is such a fundamental thing that sets us apart from the animals.
Yes.
How hard is it to innovate? How hard is it to not?
Well, exactly. This is the problem. Everything is postmodern. Everything is derivative. It's like music now. You know.
Yeah.
It is hard to innovate. You know, all you can do is hope to have a different take on something.
Yeah.
You know. When people who think they're seriously innovative, I always find they're invariably not. People like, I don't know, the dregs of the painting world, like Gilbert and George, I would think were pretty poor. But I'm sure they believe they're wonderfully innovative. You know.
But what do you call them at the urinal?
Marcel Duchamp.
Yeah. So Duchamp.
Well, Duchamp, you see, did it. He was
trying to be smart arse.
He was trying to be a smart arse, but he realised that he'd entered a cul-de-sac. You know, there was nowhere else to go. Most conceptual stuff is really simply reworking of a Marcel Duchamp idea. You know, I think he was very interesting.
Yeah. Now, where do you stand on people like Rothko?
He's an exception, and I do think Rothko. I can stand in front of a Rothko and I can tell, or to me, it is a great painting. Yeah, there is something about a Rothko.
I've really tried. I mean,
have you tried? Well, a lot of people.
The orange ones, and I go.
I know a lot of people have. You know, I've really tried to understand Jackson Pollock, Jack the Dripper, but I can't.
So I read about him that it's fractal.
Okay. So,
but at least it made more sense than something like, you know, that apparently, you know, like a tree and the branch,
yes,
and the little twig,
yes,
they're all like,
yeah,
a miniature of the big tree, and you don't know, like, if you take a tiny piece of a Pollock,
yes,
you don't know whether that's the full painting or a small section.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yes,
and that it is all, even though I've seen him working, where he's just like, looks like he's just like,
yeah.
And then, you know, when Warhol comes out with a soup can, or Tracy Emin doesn't make her bed, or
Tracy Emin, it seems to me, is exactly doing what Marcel Duchamp did. I can't see any difference. I think that gang, they're not so young, the
Bristol
YBAs,
mob.
That gang, we're very lucky, really.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, they also had Charlie Saatchi. Who was
they had
just
Charlie
throwing
Saatchi
money
throwing money at
them.
them. But another good example of an advertising man made good, of course, is Jeff Koons, you know, who took it to the logical extension.
Yeah.
You know. Now, you could look at his stuff, and it's fine, as long as you don't listen to his post-rationalised explanation. That is too much to take. He should just shut up.
And what about Roy Lichtenstein?
Well, again, I have a soft spot for him, because he took my favourite
comics,
low art. He made it important. I have always had a soft spot, but I think people, you know, the high art people would probably sneer at. Even people who like pop art or aficionados would probably sneer a bit now at Roy Lichtenstein.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's aged that well or something.
Exactly.
It's probably what you said about Warhol.
Yeah.
Your stuff, let's get back to that, and I'll put a link onto the end of the podcast so you can see some of Jon's work. I have to say is extremely original looking.
Well, thank you.
And it's very challenging work. I find like I want to get involved. Even the one that we're looking at here, all the horses are escaping, as I said earlier, from a carousel. But there's there's other stuff happening. There's a balloon gone off up in the distance, and the clouds are threatening, and maybe. But
there is a sort of mad narrative there. I'm not entirely sure what it is. It's out of control. The thing about my paintings is, I mean, they don't come easy. Actually, I do incredibly complicated drawing, which I mess about with for ages. I then blow it up to the right size. It's on drawing on tracing paper, pencil. And then I trace it onto a canvas, and I paint half of it out. But it's a tribal dance to get started. Whistler used to paint his paintings, his canvases with tea, to start off with brown, because it wasn't so frightening as white. But you've got to start somewhere, and it's that you can sit here thinking, what the hell do I do here? So it's an evolutionary.
Is the day that you take this down and put a white canvas up,
it's challenging a horrible day? It's a very challenging day, yeah. But I'm usually plotting one in my head when I'm doing this. I am now,
And then tell me about one of the things I keep getting asked through my podcast is how do you monetize it? And my answer is you don't. This is very much a labour of love.
Well, if you want to make a good living, don't do painting.
Yeah.
First of all, the gallery system is such that most decent dealers take 50%. You need at least 15 good paintings to have an exhibition. It's very, very difficult. Most artists, teach or do other things. It's very difficult to make it. The problem is there's never been a time. This struck me the other day. I've never known when there were so many art supplies shops in the world. Yeah. In London, there's hundreds of them. There's one called Cass Art, which has a slogan: let's turn everybody in this town into an artist. Well, they bloody well succeeded. There were so many people who were sort of hobby painters, which is fine. I'm not knocking that, but there's an awful lot of people who are also extremely deluded, who believe they may be discovered or believe they have. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know that somebody else did that kind of painting 100 years ago better, or that Marcel Duchamp had the idea.
Yeah. The being discovered bit and the frenzy that's suddenly, suddenly one of your paintings could pop, right?
Could.
And then all of your paintings are great.
Yes, that's
you know what I mean. And then because some guy like a Charlie Saatchi said, "This is the guy I'm going to anoint with my sword."
Precisely.
And
or the other alternative, more likely scenario is what my father told me: was if you go and be a painter, you'll end up living in a garret cutting off your ear. That's the madness. Bohemian madness.
And then Bohemian posthumously myth. You'll be famous, and none of
your. Well, your part to be the great thing about the Bohemian myth is you have to die young. You see, I'm too old to die young. But
tell me about that. Do you feel that this 25 years part of your life, third chapter if you want, has been fulfilling?
It has. But
these will be here forever.
Well, that's the terrible thing about paintings, especially oil paintings. People never throw away oil paintings. They put them in the attic. They chuck them on skips and somebody takes them off the skip. Any flea market you'll find dreadful Victorian chocolate box paintings, often with somebody's put their fist through them, but they're an oil painting. It has a sanctity. Which nothing else has. It's very odd.
But you mentioned earlier that you can drive past a building that you designed, which will be there for until the apocalypse.
Yes.
But do you find it more fulfilling for you as a life lived, that your art will survive and go on?
I do. I mean, that sounds fantastically
I don't think
pretentious.
It is. I don't think it is. No.
But I have a fairly Panglossian view about the whole thing of painting. I mean, it's what you were saying earlier, the monetary side of things. The truth is, and this is really the truth, that I would do it anyway. It's quite a happy accident that occasionally people buy my paintings, but I wouldn't know really what else to do.
But for example, I mean, this is a terrible question to ask you, but imagine if you had
go on, Sean, well,
it is all of your paintings were in a lockup somewhere and it went on fire and they all were burned tomorrow. How would you feel?
I'd feel very sad, because it would be like burning your diaries.
Right.
The thing about paintings,
but it wouldn't be like burning your children, would it?
Wouldn't be like burning your children.
You get over it.
I'd get over it. I can look at old paintings that I did, and I can tell exactly the state of mind I was in when I did them. what I was into and what I was interested in, and whether they came easily or big trouble. They're a visual diary, sometimes a bit frightening.
You talk about your interest in horror and Gothic. We talked about that at the start of the podcast. Even though your paintings are very bright and primary colours, there's always an element of darkness in them. Is that fair?
That's fair,
Somewhere. I mean,
yes.
You've got a tiger, you've got threatening clouds.
Yes.
Even the Bob Dylan one, the background is not, it's mean streets. And
yes, it's mean streets. It's actually old New York buildings that were destroyed. Yeah, there isn't that narrative. Otherwise, you drift into chocolate box.
Yeah.
I like it. I like a bit of darkness, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
You know. That's why. I mean,
do you find that painting therapeutic from that point of view?
Very much, very much so.
The other thing about art, and when I look around the art that you have on display here, is people could look at a painting and put that's very you.
Yes.
Right? Do you ever feel a bit like maybe musicians and bands, sometimes they go bin the past and go somewhere new?
Well, yes, and just taking you back to the Andy Warhol question, I don't like art, sort of coffee table books. I get this with Andy Warhol. I turn over a page, look at it, I got the picture. I'm fed up with it. I've got the next page. I like something that has some sort of narrative or something that isn't immediately obvious.
Yeah.
If there's a narrative or there's something a bit more going on, that's what I like. You know?
Yeah.
And I really admire technique. So whenever I look at paintings, I'm not really thinking, well, is that great, or would I like to? How did he do that? You know, I look at Gustav Klimt and I think, well, how did he do that? And then you find out that someone like Klimt was actually a fantastically good academic portrait painter before he went, sort of psychedelic. You know.
Yeah.
He was a really, Beaux-Arts, in the Beaux-Arts tradition, technically excellent. Same with illustrators like Maxfield Parrish. He could really draw. There was just an exhibition at Leighton House just closed about Alma Tadema. Do you know about Alma Tadema? Sir Lawrence Alma Tadema was the most famous Victorian painter. He was bigger than the Beatles. He was called Alma Tad of the Royal Acad. Yeah. And he painted biblical scenes, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, Christians being thrown to the lions. Whenever a movie maker came along, like Quo Vadis or Ridley Scott with Gladiator, the first port of call was to look at an Alma Tadema painting, and you can see in those films exact lifts from Alma Tadema paintings. The technique alone, the Bloomsbury set dismissed him as a guy who painted Victorians in togas, but in spite of what, he was a lot better painter than any of them were, but in spite of that, you just have to admire how clever is this, How does he do that? You know? How long does it take him? He was also a remarkable businessman. He once did a huge painting. He was president of the Royal Academy, and he put it in, and the ex-president said, I don't think we can show that, Sir Lawrence, because it's got a Greek boy standing at one side with a rather large penis. And Alma Tadema said, no problem, got out a pair of scissors, cut the end off, framed it separately and sold it to a gentleman collector.
Do you think you ever will get to a point where you will feel you've done all you can?
No.
No? Right.
No,
do you ever worry about that?
I do worry about it. As anybody who writes or anybody who drying up is a
Have you ever hit a wall? Or?
I have done. I could see that happening with people who make films, actually. If you've covered most of the genres in movie making, what do? You subvert the narrative and do a twist.
Well, one of my favourite movie makers are the Coen brothers.
Oh, mine too.
I love the way...
Because they're brilliant writing as well.
Excellent writing and characters.
Yes.
Crazy characters.
Yes.
I watched The Big Lebowski again last weekend. I mean, it's my third favourite movie of all time. My favourite movie of all time.
It's in my top 10.
Yeah, my favourite movie of all time is It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life.
I just think that is magnificent. Yeah. And The Life of Brian.
The Life of Brian is good.
But the narrative of The Big Lebowski is dreadful. It's like it doesn't even really make sense.
There isn't really much of a plot.
Yeah,
it's a meandering.
It's a meandering plot. The Coens said that's irrelevant. It's about
Yes.
a guy who's just drifting from one problem to another, and
Yes.
the dude tries to,
Yes.
you know,
To
and-
cope with it.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
just trying to cope with life. I find it difficult to say a favourite film. I could say a favourite genre, I could say a favourite Western has to be Little Big Man, because
Right.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
The Cheyenne translated means the human beings.
Yeah.
And the old Indian says to Dustin Hoffman that there are an endless supply of white men, but only a limited number of human beings. That's a great line.
I went to see the new Blade Runner.
So did I.
Loved it.
I loved it too. My wife Natalie hated it. So there's just too much whizzing around.
Yeah.
I know what she means.
This one felt like it was for maybe stupid people like me, trying to close the loop and make sense of, you know, whether Harrison Ford's character was a replicant or not.
Replicant,
Were
yes.
we sure about that? And
I don't think you're stupid, Sean, and
Yeah.
I don't think it was made for people like you.
But I thought it was beautiful. One of the things that they kept going on about the original was that they missed things like the internet and mobile
Yes,
phones,
yes.
and they kind of kept
They kept that out.
Like,
Yeah,
even though there
I've
was,
you know, I hadn't really. You just pointed that out. Yeah, I
they
hadn't
said it's
thought
40 years later or whatever.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they've actually kept that same universe,
about that. Yes.
and it has improved,
Yeah.
but it's improved in its own direction.
Yes. Yes.
They haven't gone, oh, quick, you better put all mobile. We better put all
Well,
modern
yes,
technology.
let's
in.
put. Yeah.
And I loved it as well back in the day when they had, like, from an advertising point of view, some of the references like Atari, Pan Am,
Yes.
and they still have the
They
Pan
still
Am
have- yeah,
signs
yes.
and stuff,
Still
which is
set-
beautiful. You know?
The Pan Am sign somehow survives the dystopia.
Exactly,
It's
you know,
there.
because somewhere there's probably a, what do you call him, Freddie Laker sign somewhere in
Probably,
London,
yes,
you know,
yes, Freddie Laker. There's a.
for his gone bust airline. Yeah.
I always wanted to do a radio interview which ended with the words Freddie Laker.
We're not finished
No, no, no.
because one
Okay.
of the other things I wanted to say to you was your art versus the shape of the world. How do you feel about the world that you live in today? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Again, I have a fairly Panglossian view of it all. I'm afraid. How do you live in a completely sick society? Schizophrenia, QED. You know? I was staying in a hotel on the Ganges, Varanasi, where they
Varanasi, yeah.
Varanasi, where
Yeah.
they burn all the bodies. It's like a death cult. I hated it. I hated it. But outside of my window, there was a bench by the side of the Ganges where two lepers sat there, a woman and presumably her daughter. Hard to tell. They were in advanced stages. They'd lost their noses and the ends of their fingers, and they sat there every day with a blanket and a tin can, and that to get money, and that was their life. I gave them 50 rupees every day. There's no point in giving them more because they have pimps who just take it from them.
Yeah.
But that was their life, and it's hard to say whether they're content because they didn't know anything else. So it's interesting, really.
I found that in India as well.
Yeah.
Caste system also instills in you a kind of a don't get above your station, and this is what you're about, and it's
Yes.
a very interesting approach to humanity.
Yes.
The Varanasi thing is interesting when they send those.
Have you been there?
I haven't been. I've been to India a lot, but I
Yes.
never got to Varanasi. But a friend of mine lived there, and he said that when the bodies go round the bend, there's a whole pile of people who are in the water taking rings and searching them, and then they go down and there's crocodiles or something further
Yeah,
down. They
yeah.
get eaten, and that's it. They're gone.
And in the side streets, they stack them for storage. You know.
Yeah.
But it's a death cult.
It
But I
is.
mean, they sell postcards of dead bodies, you know,
Yeah.
which I find incredibly disturbing. It's
Yeah.
very professional the way they do it. I don't know how we got onto burning dead people.
Well, I was just trying to see what sort of world you feel we're in.
a lot of things seem to be happening, but bad things. But my only take on it is they seem to be happening more quickly.
Or maybe
You know,
we're just getting wind of them.
We're getting
because we're so connected.
We're so connected.
You know,
Yeah.
if something happens in Varanasi today on the news
It'll
tonight,
be- and then yes, yeah.
and it might have taken a week or 10 days to
Yeah.
even get there, and even then it would be sketchy in terms
Yes.
of details. Everyone's a journalist.
Everyone's a journalist. Everyone's a
photographer.
photographer. Yeah. Everyone's a.
And everyone's a podcaster. Last question. What would you say to the Jesuit boy who was in boarding school if you could go back and whisper in his ear?
I just keep at it and don't listen to people who tell you you're useless. That was a recurring theme of my childhood. People just tell you you're never going to make much if you carry on like you are. You know. At school, you know, I had so many punishments in the end that they ran out of punishment. So the only course of action really was to be an outlaw and just not give a shit about them. And that's what I now know that I didn't know then. You don't have confidence, do you, when you're 17?
No. It tends to. I mean, I found that in Ireland as well, or Australia. They call it tall poppy, where
Call it what?
Tall poppy syndrome.
Tall poppy
Pop your head up and it gets cut off.
Yes.
The idea that children, and I even had it growing up myself, where if you in any way have an idea with your life that might be odd to the masses, you're deemed odd.
Or too clever for your own good.
For your own good.
That's the recurring phrase. It'll never work.
It'll never work. And that's the creative people. It's the creative people who get the most.
Well, in my day, the people who went to art school were the people who were no good at games.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. The people who didn't like playing rugby or whatever. People who like rock and roll and were no good at games and wanted to mess about. That doesn't exist, I'm afraid, anymore.
Well, let's keep the rock and roll going, and let's keep the iconoclasm going, and let's keep the Freddie Laker going.
Freddie Laker.
And we can finish on Freddie. Jon Wealleans, thank you so much for coming on A Pint with Seaniebee and giving me your time today. I really enjoyed that conversation. The book is Frankenstein's Dog. There'll be a link to it on the blurb. Please go and buy it for John. And I'll also have some links to his galleries where you can also look at his artwork. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean.